If you're a writer dreaming of becoming a successful author, join me, writing coach Karenna Akavane, on the How to Be an Author podcast, your weekly source for writing information, inspiration, and motivation.
What is one of the main differences between real life and a good story? I would propose that one of the main differences is that real life can sometimes be a little bit boring. You have these long stretches of time where nothing happens. And in a story, something happens. And that's why a story is entertaining. And real life can sometimes be a little boring. Whose fault is it that nothing is happening? Well, usually it's the fault of a character. Many times the main character in your life is you. And that's why today in this episode of the How to Be an Author podcast, I'm talking all about motivation. Your character's motivation, your motivation as an author, which impacts your productivity, and all of those funny blocks that get rolled into this big category of stuff we call writer's block. There's also another type of resistance. It's not just the resistance to finishing that novel that you've been saying you're going to finish. There's also the resistance to actually making this a business, because so many writers that I work with have a huge mental block when it comes to realizing that to be a successful author, you need to be an entrepreneur and a business person. But don't worry, because if that's you, you're going to be feeling a lot better, because I'm going to be walking you through what happened with a few of my writing clients who were having issues just like you when it came to the idea of motivation in their craft, talking about the inciting incident and how their character actually relates to that and reacts to it, talking about motivating to write and finish your book and how to find some little lifestyle hacks and mindset hacks to really make that more of a possibility that you're going to finish your book in the near future. And also I talk about the business side of writing, as in resistance to publishing, marketing, and promoting your book, and what you can do when you're having massive issues with that. So in this season of the How to Be an Author podcast, I thought it would be really helpful to kind of introduce you to the stories of a few of my actual clients so that you can see how real people are struggling with their writing and how a writing coach like me works with them to help them to move past those blocks. So let's start to dig deep and talk about the problem of motivation in your writing, in craft, in mindset, and in business. The first client I'm going to talk about is Daniel. He's having a real problem with his inciting incident. He's having a hard time picking an inciting incident that's powerful enough and actually launches the whole novel into being, and also that sustains the novel throughout, because many times we'll pick an inciting incident and we'll realize that it's not exactly right. So let's start to talk about the nitty-gritty of how this problem manifested and how we managed to solve the issue of an inciting incident that's not quite right for your story. So talking to Daniel throughout a few of our sessions, we were able to determine that the problem with his inciting incident was that he actually didn't really understand the full purpose of an inciting incident. He didn't understand the things that make an inciting incident right or not right for your story. And he didn't understand how to really use that as a rocket booster or a propeller for the whole plot of the story. So let's talk about what a good inciting incident actually is. The inciting incident is something that disrupts your main character's everyday world, and it forces them to jump into action or launch themselves on an adventure, whether this is an actual adventure voyage or whether it's an emotional journey that they go on. But no matter what, the first thing to realize is that it disrupts their regular life. And the thing about their regular life is it can be uncomfortable, it can be comfortable, but there's something about it that is not satisfying when it comes to allowing your character to be their full self or to be the full expression of who they're meant to be. So maybe they're living in a small town and they're doing a job that doesn't really suit them. Or maybe they've always done what's expected and they really want to go out and explore the world and understand what their purpose in life might be. Or maybe they've been lying to themselves about the fact that they don't believe in love, and then something happens to change all of that. Now, that means that you need to understand what the baseline situation is in your character's life before the inciting incident. So in a well-crafted story, the reader needs to know what that first situation was, and they need to have some understanding as to why that's not ideal. The other thing that we need before we introduce this inciting incident is that we need to already feel invested in the main character. We need to feel that we've related to the main character in some way, because this inciting incident carries its whole set of stakes in the story. It's supposed to create a hook for the reader who, once they see that this thing has happened, they go, oh no, how's my main character going to move forward and continue after this, right? So if your reader's not invested in your character yet, they're not really going to care if your character got into a car wreck that leaves them paralyzed on one side. They're gonna be like, gosh, that's awfully sad, but I never got to know this character. I didn't know that they were planning on a career in professional baseball. So this inciting incident doesn't really resonate so strongly for me. So remember that the inciting incident is not just about the incident itself, but it's about what comes before. And also, you guessed it, it's about the main incident and what happens after. So let's talk about some of the things that make good inciting incidents. And the thing that Daniel was really confused about was that he thought the inciting incident was something that his main character did. Now, the thing of an inciting incident is that your character is pretty stuck before this comes along. They would never dream of doing anything to get themselves out of their situation until something comes along that is an accident. It is an external force. It's not actually created, at least not directly, by your main character, right? So maybe they've been shoplifting every day, and now on this particular day, they shoplift, but they get caught. You see, so there's a difference. So yes, the shoplifting caused them to get caught and go to jail, and then the whole story is going to go from there, but they didn't do anything different to really incite this unless it's simply by accident, right? So external forces are important. You can't put it on your main character. So with Daniel, we had to work through that of how do we change the inciting incident so that it's not something that's been actively done. So good inciting incidents, natural disaster, random act, a stranger comes, a letter is sent. All of these types of situations are a good inciting incident. And the situation that an inciting incident is going to create is one that is kind of intriguing. So you're trying to set up some kind of suspense, right? Will they or won't they? Your character doesn't really have the choice of doing nothing. That's untenable. But what exactly they do should be a little bit up in the air, because oftentimes your character might think, here's this inciting incident, I need to react to it in this way. And later in the book, this way proves to be the wrong road taken. So then they're going to have to learn to grow and change to see what the actual outcome is going to be. So that's really important too, that you have this setup of an intriguing problem or situation that the reader is going to want to know the outcome of. Now, the next thing is that you want to make sure that your inciting incident is tailored to your main character. So a random inciting incident that doesn't really align with or challenge your main character's hopes, dreams, values, abilities, strengths, weaknesses, all of that, that is a much less compelling inciting incident. So think about that. How is this inciting incident uniquely suited to this character? Many times you're going to see, like especially in adventure movies or things like that, you're going to see where there's this world disaster, but for some interesting, intriguing reason, character A over here, who was just an every woman to start with, she's uniquely suited to actually rise to the occasion. So think of things like Terminator. You've got this character who's kind of timid at the beginning, but then she ends up being the one who's going to save the world. Or you've got, for example, an alien invasion, and you've got this character who's a harried dad, and he actually can rise to the occasion because he's got a child who's got these extreme allergies, and so they've learned how to isolate and how to deal with things on the fly, and that makes them the great character to save humanity from the alien invasion. Now, this is probably a terrible example, but in your book, think about how that inciting incident really calls upon your character's particular strengths and weaknesses and challenges them, right? The obstacles that are going to come are going to be even more unsurmountable for your specific character, but they also have those strengths so that they can eventually move past them. The other really major thing with your inciting incident is you must think conflict and tension. The inciting incident cannot be something that's easy and that can be ignored. The regular life of your character should not be something that can be returned to in good faith, right? So if they find out that everything they thought is not true, going back to their ordinary life is going to be a horribly unsatisfying story. So imagine if Harry Potter got the letters to go to Hogwarts, finds out he's a wizard, and then just goes back to living with his aunt and uncle and his horrible cousin. That doesn't really sound like a very satisfying story. So keep that in mind, that these obstacles and the tension, they're going to be really strong, but the option of going back is not an option. So either you destroy the situation that your character's in, their homeland gets obliterated, or they find out a truth that makes it impossible for them to press rewind, right? Your character finds out that their significant other's been cheating on them horribly, and who would they be to go back to them unless they're going back to them for a reason, blah, 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 right? So you really need to set this up, because if your inciting incident is something that can pretty much be ignored and that the character has a choice, it's not powerful enough. And when I talk about why an inciting incident needs to be powerful, this is because it needs to keep pushing the plot forward, not just the beginning. Now, this is another issue that Daniel had that was major, and I've seen a lot of other writers do this, which is you have an inciting incident and then your character essentially seems to forget about it, and they get motivated by other things, or they just start doing things. And the motivation that was created by this inciting incident seems to be essentially forgotten throughout the novel. And this really weakens your plot. So this is something where this inciting incident is something that needs to be reminded all the time. Your reader needs to know that this happened, and since this happened, nothing will be the same. Now, the initial situation that happens after the inciting incident can start to evolve. Usually, things should get worse for your main character before they get better, but realize that the inciting incident needs to be powerful enough to be present throughout the novel, because if not, your plot peters out or makes no sense. So basically, the inciting incident must be intimately related to the main plot. You can't have inciting incident A and then plot B takes over that has nothing to do with it. That's not going to be okay. And also think about how you keep fitting that inciting incident. Now, the inciting incident does not exist in a bubble. The inciting incident needs to fit within your plot, as we said. So first of all, I think that it's important to know when to introduce the inciting incident. So there's one school of storytelling that says that you should introduce it pretty darn early in your story, right? To set the story into movement. And this means that just the bare minimum of getting us to know the character, seeing their life, and then boom, inciting incident, and off we go. This is a very Hollywood way of writing a story, and it absolutely works. And if you're a newer writer, you might want to stick to this method. But if you're a more experienced writer or trying to write something that's a little bit more literary, you might think about, how do I create suspense by teasing the eventual inciting incident that's going to come, foreshadowing it, and putting a little bit more of the backstory of the book into the beginning without info dumping, but having things happen, having your character have more of a struggle before the inciting incident comes to be. But foreshadowing, making it so that we know it's coming. We don't just think that we're reading a story about your character going about their regular life. That's not going to be very, very exciting. But you can play with timing a little bit. However, seek feedback from a writing coach or a writer's group or a beta reader to find out if your pacing is spot on or if it's not ideal. Pacing is one of those things that really makes a book, and not enough writers think about pacing. And this is why when I have my workbook that I created for DIY Writer or my From Idea to Publish in 6 Months, pacing and actually like the nitty-gritty formulas of storytelling to make your story move along, I spend a lot of time teaching you guys how to do that, because it's such an important skill. And once you've learned it, you'll be really looking out for it, and it's going to help your storytelling so much in the long run. The craft of writing is about the craft of communicating a story to a writer, not just writing pretty sentences. So keep that pacing issue in mind. That foreshadowing is going to be a great tool for you when it comes to the inciting incident. Think also thematically. How does my inciting incident fill in? Is there a theme in the story? Is there a moral to the story? You don't want to shove it down our throats, but the inciting incident definitely should carry some of those thematic elements. And you don't need to settle on the first inciting incident you thought of. I see too many books where the inciting incident is that somebody's sibling, parent, lover is killed, or their homeland is obliterated, or these kind of cliche inciting incidents. You can do better. So why don't you brainstorm a bunch of inciting incidents and start to feel for which one would be right and which one's going to be more powerful and which one's going to serve your story best. One little exercise I often have my writers do is I'll say, hey, watch a TV show or a movie and something that you think works really well, something that you think is a great story. And now try to look at what's the inciting incident, what's the timing to how it's teased out, and how is it present throughout the whole story of this movie. Or of course, read a book. But many of us now are writing to entertain, and those of us who are, Hollywood has really honed this formula to perfection. So it's definitely worth looking at it. And of course, as always, Save the Cat is a great resource when it comes to thinking about the inciting incident and where it fits into your story. But in my courses and in my DIY author workbook, I also have a narrative architecture that I've created that tweaks Save the Cat a little bit to simplify it for you, but also to make it a little bit more emotionally resonant. And I think that makes for a really good story that your reader can dive right into. So for Daniel, what we did was we made sure that he understood what the inciting incident was supposed to do. We made sure to look at that foreshadowing and to maintain that tension throughout the book. And I'm happy to report that he now has an inciting incident that actually works, that challenges his characters, and that is something that absolutely is at the center of a very good plot. And in case you're wondering about the huge mistakes and inciting incidents that I've seen with some of my other clients, some of them would be predictability, for sure. I was talking about brainstorming. A good inciting incident, don't make it predictable. Weak inciting incident, or one that's like a little bit too mushy and not direct, something that kind of elicits a maybe I should do this from the character, that's not good enough, right? So if you've got a wishy-washy inciting incident, not going to be super helpful. And again, something that's not connected to the character enough and therefore doesn't have enough of an impact or high enough stakes, all of these things can be mistakes. Now, another mistake, though, is that too many writers, especially newer writers, think that the inciting incident therefore needs to be utterly catastrophic on a world level. Remember that your character has a rich inner world, inner life. Maybe they have their family nucleus. Remember that the inciting incident can act on just that internal level as it can act on the family or friend level or the village level. It doesn't need to go all the way up to the world level, but it can act on several levels, right? So if you have an inciting incident where the whole world is going to be destroyed, then you need to make sure that you bring it down to the personal level as well, because the most crucial level that is impacted by this because the most crucial level that is impacted by this inciting incident is always the emotional level of your main character. That's what the reader is really going to sink their teeth into. Emotional resonance is the most important thing, and the consequences, right? Emotional and real. As always, if you need more help with this, more nitty-gritty help, you're gonna get it inside my courses, or you can always give me a call and see, what I can do for you as a writing coach and to help you to work through these issues with your story, because your story is at the heart of your success as an author, right? There are several arms. There's your story itself, there's your productivity, and then there's the marketing side. So let's now move into the productivity part, because motivation is one of those things where, as a writer, so many of my writers come to me and they're like, man, I wish I had an inciting incident because I can't seem to make myself finish this book that I've been saying I want to write for the past 10 years or whatever. And that was the case with my writing client, Heather. Heather has been saying she wants to write a book. She's had fits and starts. She's got notebooks full of half-started novels. She's got, overall, we counted together, she had like 200,000 words done of various things. And believe me, she's a good writer. So what's not working? When she came to me, she was like, I'm at the end of my tether. This is just embarrassing. I keep telling people that I'm writing my book, and they're like, well, where is it, Heather? And it's not there because there's a fundamental problem with her motivation. So how do we create an inciting incident for ourselves to actually finally motivate and be productive when it comes to finishing our book? Let me say why this is so important. First of all, you want to be a writer, you have to write a book. You're a writer, but you can't be an author until you've published a book. And also, success as an author is oftentimes directly related to how many books you publish. So I'm not saying you need to publish 50, but if you publish 3 books, it's better than publishing 1 book and never publishing anything again. And I know a lot of writers in that category because writing a book is a lot of hard work. So sometimes you've powered through, you've written the first one, and it didn't really work the way you thought it would. And so many times that's going to be the thing that's going to block you completely from writing another one. And I get that. But let's talk about how we talked Heather through to motivate a little bit better. First, I think it's really important to know why you're not motivating. Now, this is not really one size fits all. Different people have different reasons for why they're not motivating, and they make different excuses for why they're not motivating. So the first exercise that I had Heather do is I had her write down all the reasons why she wasn't motivating, and I had her look at those reasons and tell me which ones were actually reasons and which ones were excuses, because those are two different things, right? A reason is something real. You have an illness in the family that's really going to upset the whole life and you need to figure things out. Or maybe you just started a new job and you're literally working 20 hours a day. There's no way you're going to be finishing your book. I would be a horrible writing coach if I told you, like, you know what, push through, baby, you can do this. No, you can't. Sometimes it's the wrong time, right? But for many of us, we don't have any of these disastrous elements. We're just busy, or we're just overwhelmed, or we just don't know, we're procrastinating. We don't know why. So the next exercise, once we've seen the excuses we're giving and we've seen the reality of what is an excuse and what is a reason, I want you to then pretend that you're your own writing coach and say, okay, here's this reason for why I can't write. Is there a way to move past this? Is there a way to make this better? Because oftentimes the solution that you're going to find is going to be just as good as, if not better than, what I can find, because your solution is uniquely tailored to you. You know your schedule, you know your mindset, you know your mentality, you know what triggers you, what makes you work, what motivates you. That's going to be really crucial. But I know that oftentimes you need handholding, and that's why I have people who are in my programs, because it pushes them forward and tells them when they should be doing certain things and reminds them, like, here's a checklist. You need to be doing this. A checklist is such a great tool. If you don't get my course, which is totally fine, and if you don't get DIY Author, which I don't know why you wouldn't, but if you didn't, you could create your own checklist for the things that you're meant to do. But I know that, like Heather, you want to understand a little bit better, why am I not doing this thing I wanted to do? It's a little thing called resistance, but how does resistance come along? There are many reasons for resistance, but one of the big ones is fear. we've got our ego, we've got fear. Fear of failure is major. And failure in writing has so many different faces. Isn't that convenient? You've got fear that you're never going to follow through and finish your book. And when you're afraid that you actually can't do it, your brain tries to save you by saying, you know what, I'm going to spare you this failure by making you never do it so that, you're not wasting your time trying to work on something that you kind of inside yourself knew you couldn't do. So one of the big tricks is starting to break it down so that you actually convince yourself for real that you can do this thing. Because once you believe you can do it, that's when you actually are able to do it. Look at the whole story about people running a mile in under 4 minutes. Nobody did it at all until one guy does it, and all of a sudden, multiple people are doing it. How does that work? It was a complete mental block. Once you know it can be done, you can do it. So whatever it takes to convince yourself that this can be done, whether it's breaking it down into tasks, getting the help you need, or simplifying your concept, all of those things can be great ways of getting it done. The other fear of failure is fear that it's going to sell badly, that it's going to be a big flop. People are going to laugh at you. Yeah, I get that. But if you want to be a writer, you need to do the things that you need to do to get it out there. Like, that's just part of your job. And it's fine to look at what you're doing and say, you know what? I'm actually not equipped to bring my book out in front of people. I don't feel strong enough mentally to do this. That's fair as well, right? So I'm not going to force you to be an author. You could be journaling right now and making yourself happy. Like, maybe you are one of those authors who just wants to write for themselves. And that's hunky-dory. Don't feel guilty about that, because it does take guts and it takes a lot of hard work and a lot of mental angst to actually put yourself out there and to put yourself in the risk of failure, because books don't just magically sell themselves. So if you're feeling that you are not equipped to deal with that right now, keep writing, keep polishing your craft. You're still doing something, but maybe it's not the right time to be a published author right now. So consider that. Now, if that triggers you to say, that's it, I'm going to prove to you that I can do it. Yay, I'm glad. That's really great too. Because there's another reason that people are not motivated, is that they see that it takes sacrifice to be a writer. It takes having to tweak what you're doing. It's tweaking your lifestyle. It's tweaking your priorities in your life. Like, maybe you can't socialize as much as you wanted to because you need to dedicate a couple evenings to writing your book. Or maybe you can't go on that trip because you actually invested that money to pay for an editor or a writing course. These things are sacrifice and they are choices. So when you've got the inciting incident, that is, something happens that super fires you up to write a book, well, you've got different courses of action, right? You can decide to answer the call to adventure and write the book the way you dreamed of, or you can tweak it. And is that going to be as satisfying an ending? I don't know. Depends on your character. Depends on what you tell yourself. So with Heather, one of the big things was she had a lot of external and internal distractions. She's pretty ADHD. A lot of my writing clients are. I think that they actually resonate with the fact that I am hyperactive ADHD and that I've found ways of working around that. So a lot of the stuff was, she's a perfectionist, but it takes her so much effort to actually get the work done because of the external distractions of her pets, her job, TV, social media, her friends, her obligations. All of that's really, really hard. And then she's got that internal perfectionism that she keeps writing the same chapter over and over again. And when you do that, like, start to look at realistically, I had her look, I'm like, look how much time you've spent writing chapter 1 20 times, like fully 20 times. You could have written 20 chapters in that time. So start to see realistically the things that you're doing that are hurting you a lot, because many times you're the one doing this to yourself, right? So you have to understand this perfectionism, P.S., horrible thing, but you're never going to write a book that's perfect, ever. So let's write a book that's done. Let's write a book that some readers will like. Some will probably say this was a piece of crap, and that's okay too. I'm not saying to publish the crap. I'm saying Do your best, but you will never get perfect. So forget this excuse of perfectionism. That is an excuse. That is a delay tactic. And I want you to see it for what it is. Another issue that many writers have is they have a lack of clear goals. They're like, I want to write a book. That's great. But why exactly do you want to write a book? What's your goal with that book? How successful do you want to be? How many readers do you want to reach, and how do you want to reach them? Do you want to reach them in person? Do you want them to be talking online? Do you want to impact a certain type of reader? What is your vision of success? All of these questions really help to kind of focus on what your exact clear objective is, because I always say put success in your GPS, but without an address, you can't get there, right? So having a clear vision of what your goal is one of the absolute non-negotiable steps, because how do you break tasks down into smaller tasks if you don't know what the big task is to begin with? So that's really, really important. And again, I've got worksheets about this that really help you to do the tough work to realize what your goal really is. Because the other thing is that when your goal is just kind of huge and nebulous, it becomes very overwhelming. And the huge, gravity of how big this task is of writing the book, promoting the book, editing the book, publishing the book, all of these things, it can lead to some pretty significant overwhelm. And when you are also on top of that, sacrificing your social time, your gym time, your leisure time, your TV watching, and then you're telling yourself, I've got so much work to do, it becomes overwhelming. And you're like, let me quit while I'm ahead, because I don't know that this is going to work out. Let me just quit. Reminding yourself that you can do it, looking at excuses and ways to get around them, breaking it down because you have a clear goal. Those are all ways to break through that massive motivation block that so many writers have. And you need to remind yourself all the time of why you're doing this. Crucial. And why you're doing this is not some stupid external reason like my ex-boyfriend said I couldn't do it and I'm going to show him. That can enter into it, but you've got to find some internal motivation, because if not, you're going to end up burnt out and frustrated. But also, you need to celebrate the little wins. If you are underplaying your little wins, if you're underplaying the fact that, hey, you're doing pretty darn good, you are not going to keep moving forward, because your brain's saying, well, I don't see any progress. What's going on? That motivation is going to wane. So you need to keep feeding your motivation. Don't think that you're deficient if your motivation flags. It will. It's so important to keep track of what you're doing and really to be realistic with yourself of like, here's my checklist. Here are my goals with the time that I wanted to allot to them. How am I doing and why? So keep yourself on track. So many of my writing clients make sure that I keep them accountable. I'll give them homework. I'll give them things to do. But now that you don't get Writing Coach on Demand anymore, because that program is over, you are able to do that with the workbooks and with the course. You have an actual schedule and a checklist to move you through. So you might be wondering, how is Heather doing today with her motivation? I would love to be able to report that it's all fixed. She's doing perfectly. But here's the thing. Motivation is something that will flag. It will go up and down. Your productivity will go up and down. She's got good days and she's got bad days, but honestly, she's now found the tools to keep her on track a little bit better. And also, one of the big tricks that I tell my writers is oftentimes when you start a project is when you're most at risk to start to falter in your motivation. When you're just starting, you've got that blank page or you've got 90,000 words in front of you, and that's just such a huge thing. I always say you can't edit a blank page, and also your motivation starts to raise when you see your goal getting closer. So that's why I often recommend using the dictation method so that you actually can get more done faster. You can have a big heaping pile of poo that you can edit, but at least you have something. That really helps. So my whole dictation technique, which I teach you in DIY Author and in From Idea to Publish in 6 months, that's really going to get you going. I think. I love having at least like a NaNoWriMo event where you can get 50,000 words done in a month. They're 50,000 pieces of crap, but it's something. It's better than nothing. And that for motivation for me is really, really great. So Heather's been using the Pomodoro technique. She's been using dictation. She's been using all these things. And it is getting better. It's not easy every day. And don't think that it will be. Like, don't feel bad if you're not motivated. You're not the only one on earth. Now we've got section 3 of this podcast. You know that as a writing coach, I focus not only on the nitty-gritty writing craft tips and advice, but I also like to talk about writing mindset, writing motivation, and the business of being an author. So let's talk about my third client. Her name is Keisha, and she was having a massive issue with the idea that a writer is a small business owner, pretty much, right? Writing is a business, and she was having a really hard time motivating when it came to actually pulling the trigger on those things that would move her writing career forward. She was future tripping because she wasn't even done with her book yet, and I feel like she was slowing down because she didn't want to have to do these things. And she told me several times, I'm not a business person, I'm a creative. I don't like the business part. That's why I want to be a writer. I want to publish conventionally because I don't want to do any of my marketing work. And listen, fair enough. Many of us do feel this way. I used to feel this way. And it's not fun every day to promote your book, but you can find creative challenges in being a business person who happens to be writing books, because you need to realize that even if you are deciding that you want to publish conventionally, and that when you query agents, do you not realize that a query letter is basically a business proposal? Your agent or your publisher are not taking on your book out of the goodness of their hearts because they think it's a creative thing. They're thinking about how many copies of that book are going to sell. It's a business proposition. Are we able to sell copies of this book? Yes or no? That's how you're going to be accepted or rejected. So you already need to have some of the business fundamentals. And one of the things that's going to make an agent decide to take you on or not is how professional you are. So remember that there's no magic way that you can be an artiste and have somebody take you on and not expect you to do any of the marketing or any of the effort. Many times, agents and publishers want you to have a large platform, and that includes social media, that includes a mailing list. And that platform, how much they're asking for, is getting bigger and bigger, which is a horrible thing to realize. I just did a video about how social media for writers is becoming less and less effective because there's so much noise out there. Piercing through that noise is getting more and more difficult. And even if you have a video go viral, it's not going to impact your sales that much because people are not going to hold attention on that. So that's important to realize, is that just because you're making a video or two or so on social media, that's not sufficient for your author platform. Start to think more realistically in terms of, these are the business things that are required of me. So as usual, the more you know, the better it is. If you know what kind of business-like tasks are required of you and you break them down so that you can address them on a schedule and that you can hold yourself accountable, that's going to make your life easier. So I have this sort of issue in my workbooks and in my courses. You get your author platform and all those author marketing things, you get them all broken down for you step by step so that you know exactly how to do them. And because it's not rocket science, but we're not born knowing how to do the business of writing. Some of us are born with like innate storytelling skills. Some of us are born being better or worse writers. Some of us are born being better or worse at business, for sure. But every single one of these things is it's a skill that you can learn. And that's something that's a huge part of my platform, is teaching you that these are skills. So with Keisha, we're like, okay, what are the minimum skills that you need to do? But before we did that, we actually really had to have a pretty serious discussion because she was very resistant to doing these business things. I'd have a serious discussion with Keisha about, do you want to be a professional author, or do you just want to journal? Do you want to write for yourself and work on your craft until you feel capable of doing these business things? Because I don't want you to waste your time. I mean, I think to myself, it's a lot of work to put in these marketing hours, or to put in these social media hours, or to build your website, to promote your book, to show up on podcasts, to talk about your book. And very realistically, as myself under my name as an author, I don't do a fraction of the work I should do. Now, as some of my pen names, I do a lot more work. And sometimes, you know what, that's easier. Sometimes it's harder. So keep in mind, what is it that I am able to do? But also for me, for example, I'm getting to the point where I realize that, okay, at the beginning, I think that you need to do most of this yourself because it's your platform, it's your voice, it's your audience. Like that's what people are actually relating to. But after a while, you get to a point where you realize that I need to invest more. And that's another tough level in that whole business of writing thing. At some point, you need to realize that writing, so many authors go into it thinking, this is something that's going to be easy for me. I'm not good at business, so I'm just going to write a story and then it's going to sell itself. And it's a zero investment deal. That's not true, right? So if you do DIY author, it's very, very inexpensive after you've done the course, which is only $47 now. But the time investment, the effort investment, that's kind of huge. You need to be realistic about that. So for me, I've gotten to the point where I'm like, I need to actually invest money so that I can pay people now to streamline the things, like streamline my content, streamline trying to get me onto podcasts, streamline, my blog posts. And, so when you batch tasks, like that really helps, but there comes a point where your author platform and your author life is going to become unmanageable. And I don't want that to happen to you too early. I want you to figure out, what are the minimum things that I can do that I can manage for now before I grow? And so with Keisha, we're like, okay, you can get a simple web page done. You can put some stuff up on social media and try to grow a mailing list. Now, again, she's not making miracles yet, but I think it's a miracle that she's grown her mailing list to 500 people. Like that's great. Growing your mailing list to 500 people is something that you should absolutely celebrate. I think that having, for example, a 500 person mailing list is roughly equivalent to having 25,000 people following you on Instagram or on TikTok, really, because you're actually getting right into people's inbox. People are actually paying attention. The people who click on that email and open it, they're feeling much more tied to you than they would if they're just scrolling on social media for kicks and giggles. And also, if you appear on a podcast, whether it's your own or somebody else's, hearing you talk and listening to you and having you in their ear, that is so much more worth it as well. So think about the things that actually pay off. Think about where you're running yourself ragged, doing the author things that you thought you needed to do that you didn't need to do. So I really think it's important that with the business of writing, let's break down the barriers and break down the obstacles by streamlining it and making it easier, but also seeing what the motivation is, because what is my goal at the end? Let me break it down. So that's it. I'm not going to shove all this business stuff down your throat. I have much more specific stuff on my website, in my courses. You can find it all there, but you need to know that some business is required. But if you find it absolutely impossible to wrap your head around that, that's something where you need to be very, very true to yourself and realize, am I wasting my time doing this? Could I be doing something else that I feel more able to make into a business? Completely fair as well. So that's it. I hope that this podcast on motivation motivates you to move forward. I hope that this whole idea of the inciting incident, what makes a good one, helps you to structure your plot and to make your story stronger. I hope that you feel kind of refreshed and ready to break through your procrastination. And I hope that you're starting to wrap your mind around the idea that a little bit of business is required as an author to be an authorpreneur. That's going to make your life so much easier, but that it's not one size fits all and that you can tailor things to work for you. It's just about your goals and your priorities, and be honest about those. If you're honest about those with yourself, I think it's going to make your writing life much easier. My 3 clients certainly feel like they have moved to the next level. I hope you do too after all of this. Never hesitate to reach out to me. You can go to my website, creativeandwritingcoach.com, or look at my courses, onlinecoursesforwriters.com, or just reach out to me, Karat.com. That's my email address. You'll find that on my website as well. And I welcome all of your questions and any of your ideas for future podcasts. But I so appreciate being able to be here with you as kind of your de facto podcast writing coach on the How to Be an Author podcast. I'll see you next week.
If you have any pressing writing-related questions or would like to be featured on the How to Be an Author podcast, please feel free to reach out on my website, creativeandwritingcoach.com.